Joining me now is Texas Democratic Congressman Colin Allred. Congressman, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us once again. First, let me get your reaction, if I can, your thoughts on what we just heard there from my colleague Ken Dilanian about how the FBI now is saying that, supporters of the former President Donald Trump discussed, quote, a revolution before January the 6th and what we saw presented in that court document.
Well, I agree that we all knew something was going to happen that day. And we had discussions about it, and we had members who were worried about coming to the Capitol that day. And so this was not a surprise to us in our own capacities, just reading our own social media accounts. And I'm sure the FBI was aware of what was happening. I think it was a failure both to communicate and to prepare. And this is why we need to have a bipartisan commission like we did after 9/11 to study what happened, why it happened, and what we can do to make sure it never happens again.
Let's talk about some of the developments taking place on Capitol Hill. I'll start this afternoon. Former President Barack Obama holding a telephone town hall with activists pushing for voting rights bills that are now under consideration in the Senate. He made this connection between the events of January the 6th and the need for these bills. Watch.
We can't wait until the next election, because if we have the same kinds of shenanigans that brought about January 6th. If we have that for a couple more election cycles, we're going to have real problems in terms of our democracy long term.
A pretty stark warning there from the former president. Does this threat drive up the urgency to pass some effort to protect voting rights, even if that includes West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin's package here that would require voter ID?
I think that the former president is right that we are facing an existential crisis. Our democracy is literally on the line right now. And what we're seeing is efforts to make sure that no matter how hard you work to register voters and turn out the vote and do all the things that we know we do in every election, that the fix is going to be in. That's going to be set before you ever enter a voting box, who's going to win certain elections, and that if they don't like who won in certain states, they may be able to overturn it just by an act of the legislature. That is how our democracy dies. It really is. And I think we need to start having a much more serious conversation about this. It's not a Democratic priority. It needs to be a priority for our democracy, that we fix our voting, allow folks to vote, let the people vote. Let's see where the chips fall. You may win some, you may lose some, but that's how our democracy works.
And you got some concerns at the state level now, certainly in a place like Texas that is at the forefront of the voting rights battle. Governor Greg Abbott, as you probably are aware, expected to call a special session to take up a bill that would, among other things, limit early voting, ban drive-through voting, and tighten voting by mail rules. Obviously, Democrats were able to stop it at the end of the regular session by simply not attending the session. But what did Democrats need to do before the special session to ensure the bill doesn't move forward? Do they actually have any powers to stop it from happening?
They may have some procedural tools in their toolbox, but really what this is about, I think, is making sure the people of Texas understand what they were trying to do in the dark of night on a holiday weekend, to try and pass this voter restriction bill at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Most of the people who were on the conference committee hadn't even seen a lot of the language that was in the final bill. And that's why the House Democrats had to walk out to prevent it from happening. And this is why we need to have federal legislation. We have to have some kind of national standards so that our democracy is not radically different from state to state. And Senator Manchin put forward a plan that I can support, I can get behind, because we have to have something to make sure that our democracy is still intact, because states like Texas will do whatever they can to try and make sure that the election is decided before you ever enter the ballot box.
And finally, Congressman, I want to talk to you about infrastructure, because it is becoming, a hot issue given the efforts to try and get something passed. You sit on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And while we still don't know the full details of the bipartisan Senate infrastructure package that has been negotiated between the 11 Republicans and 10 Democratic senators that are on board, some of your more progressive colleagues in the House are opposed to it because it does not do enough to address climate change. Where do you come down on this? Are you looking for a comprehensive infrastructure package that deals with both climate change and infrastructure at the same time, or do you support separating the two, as some have suggested?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of a false distinction. I think that any infrastructure package is going to involve climate because so much of what drives our climate change comes from, our transit and whether it's cars or other forms of our infrastructure. And so it's all part of the same conversation. But, I'm supportive of us having these bipartisan talks. I want to see a deal come out of this. But I also recognize the American Society of Civil Engineers gave our infrastructure nationally a C- and said that we need $6 trillion in investment over the next 10 years just to bring it up to snuff. We're the richest country in the world with the 13th ranked infrastructure in the world. We have to do something, and something big. This is an opportunity for us. I hope it can be bipartisan. We have to act. I agree with what President Biden said at the joint session of Congress. He wants to do it in a bipartisan way, but not acting is not an option.
All right, Congressman Colin Allred, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time.